but I will talk a little about the Akedah connected with what we already know.
Yes.
All being well. So this evening we're going to read what's probably one of the most dramatic chapters in the Moreh Nevukhim. I'm referring to book 3, chapter 32. Okay, and it is, as I said, one of the most remarkable chapters and the most original chapters, and the most, the mostest of the mostest. So let's see, we're just about coming up to starting time. We may be there. And what Maimonides does in this chapter is he really puts the Torah in its historical context. And he uses evidence around at the time of idolatry and idolatrous practices, and he makes them a basis for mitzvot. So that in itself is a revolutionary thought, certainly on behalf of a medieval rabbi. But then Rambam is no regular medieval rabbi, as we know. And so we're going to read the chapter, and we're going to ask, of course, a question that arises out of the fact that if you do place the Torah in a historical context, what happens when the historical context changes? So with that very brief introduction, let's share a screen and let's go. Good. All right. Kishetitbonen bipulot ha'elohiyot. Line 4. When you examine the activities of God, Ratzoni lomar hapulot hativiyot, that is nature, yitvaer lecha mehem ormat Hashem v'chochmato, you will realize that God, well, what's orma?
Ruse.
Orma is slyness. It's
Cunning.
It's pejorative.
It is.
Yeah.
Vanachash haya arum.
Mikol.
Yeah, he was very cunning. So the cunningness of God, the chokhmato, and his wisdom. Now here it does help to go back to the Arabic text and to know a little bit of context, because if you just read this, you'll say, wow, what, the Rambam is accusing God of being like the original sin serpent? Jean? Of course not. So it's actually talatuf. Now, talatuf in Arabic, latuf actually means mercy. And the tal bit is subtle, which is in a way cunning, but then it's not pejorative. Subtle, you could be a subtle person, that could be a matter of praise. In French, I think you said the same thing, subtle, right? Or subtil. Subtil.
Ah, subtil.
Subtil.
Oui.
Exactly. So that's not pejorative, Jean.
Not at all.
Not at all. Well, there we are. So having gone back to the Arabic, we now understand the Hebrew. Ibn Tibbon, can't always find the exact word. So what we could say, if we translate it, I guess, into Hebrew, would be, well, anyhow, let's just say gracious subtlety. It's a combination of shininut and chesed. So this concept is found actually in the Quran. It's in the 18th Surah, Ayat 19. It's a fairly well-known Shi'i doctrine from the medieval Shiite theologians. Describes the fact that God, and remember they were very much into natural science, God works in very subtle ways. And it's subtle, but it's a kind subtle. He doesn't take you directly in the natural world to a result, but we work through bodily processes. Say you want to move your arm, Jack. What does it take for you to move your arm? Medically speaking.
Well, it's instinctive, really. Because the pathway is so, you've done it so often, it just happens very quickly.
Yeah, but tell me now, Jeff, what is necessary in your body before you move your arm? Any movement.
nerves.
Muscles.
What happens before the muscles?
The brain.
Nerves.
The brain.
Nerve.
Let's start with the brain. The brain or the spinal cord. It depends. Then messages have to be sent. The messages are carried by the nerves. The nerves connect to the ligaments. The ligaments connect to the tendons. The tendons connect to the muscles.
Sounds like a Sammy, what's it song?
And I'm being told that this sounds like
It's
a
Sammy Davis Jr. song.
Sammy Davis. I might have thought that it would have been like Ezekiel and the bones connected to each other. But whatever it is, this is God's gracious subtlety. He doesn't say, press a button and your arm will move. But there's a whole story in order to get you to move your arm in the way that we can move our arms so beautifully and with such great coordination. Bibriut Baalei Chaim, beginning of line 5. All creatures are created in this way. Vadarat tunuot ha'ivarim, ushchenutam k'tzatam nik'tzatam. We need to have muscles, tendons, nerves together, reaching each other, and everything is a step in the process which gets us, which now truly we do it instinctively. It's a wonderful thing, but we know there's a lot going in there. Now, this is what is meant by talatuf, and it's partly theological because nothing God does is done, as it were, just like that. It's not like waving a magic wand and a spell. Everything has to go through a system. This is the way God designed the world. Now, then he goes on to say, line 6, Asher hitba'aru, and God's wisdom is revealed, especially the gradualness, if you like, of every bodily process in every living being, humans and animals, and then you could perhaps even go to reefs and algae and polyps and all sorts of other things. Asher hitba'aru b'sefer to'alot ha'evarim. All this is explained nicely, says the Rambam, in the 12th century, in a book called The Uses of the Limbs. Who do you think wrote the book? Maimonides cites a medical book in the 12th
Galen.
century. I hear on my left, Galen. And the answer, of course, is Galen, the great Greek whose medicine ruled the world of the West and the East for 1,000 years, until most of what he said was proved wrong. It is, in fact, Diusu Partrium Humani Corporis, chapter 1, section 17. This is the combination of the biology of the time, the theology of the Talatuf, and Galen. If you have a clear mind, you'll understand. So God also produced this gracious subtlety in mammals. Mammals have babies. What do babies of mammals do?
Suck.
They
Yeah,
suckle,
right.
yonkim. Because the newborn baby is very soft. And lo yuchal lihizon bimazon yavesh. He cannot eat a steak or enjoy, well, anyhow, I'll leave the rest to your imagination. But he couldn't take in food. And therefore there are mammary glands and breasts to produce milk. Now, here I could get into Aristotle's four humors, the wet, the dry, the hot, and the cold, and tell you that everything in the world, of course, they believed was a combination of these four humors. And but we're not going to spend a lot of time on Aristotle. And actually, medical thought that ruled the roost in Europe for close to 1,000 years. But it's clear to us that you could not give a baby adult food to eat. And therefore, God did a great thing by providing milk. Rambam is graphic about this, and he says that eventually, of course, body becomes hard and the limbs become adult. and then Rishon Hadraga, each one, eventually you can eat the food that adults eat. Now, having said that and proving his point about the gracious subtlety of God by taking things in a process type way and not doing it all in one big bang, he goes on to say the bolded bit in line 9, וכמו זאת ההנהגה בעוצמה מן המנהיג ההוא יתברך, באו דברים רבים בתורתנו. Same thing applies to our Torah. There are many things in the Torah which are there because at some stage we were babies and needed milk. And only in the passage of time are we able to consume adult food. God's way of running the world is that we cannot go from one extreme to the other in a flash. At every stage of human development or of social development, there are things that are accepted. And we have to accept these for what they are. And God has to work with these things. Because God is being presented here as a divine being, all-knowing and all-powerful, but working with the state of society, the way people are. So when God sent Moshe, peace be upon him, to make Israel into a nation of priests and a holy people, and give us the da'at, the mind, to start the path to perfection, and to serve God, as the Rambam has told us, the highest human being serves God intellectually, okay? As we said, avodah shebelev, va'avadatem et Hashem Elohechem, va'amar v'oto tavodu. Line 15, Haya minhag mufurasam ba'olam kolo shahayu az regilin bo. How do you serve God? Well, people 3,000 years ago would have said you serve God by offering sacrifices. Avodah kolelet asher gidlo aleha. להקריב מיני בעלי חיים, בהיכלות ההם אשר היו מעמידים בהם הצלמים, ולצוות להם ולטאטא לפניהם. How do you serve God 3,000 years ago? You make a temple, you bring sacrifice, you offer incense, that's how you serve God. העובדים הפרושים היו אז האנשים הנתונים לעבודת ההיכלות ההם, סויים לשמש ולירח ולכוכבים כמו שבראנו. And you had to have priests who were devoted to keeping these temples going and running the services. אם כן, לא גזרה חוכמתו ותקבולתו המבוארת בכל בריאותיו שהצוונו להניח מני עבודות הם כולם ולבטלם. God would not tell us to stop serving God this way because he always employs gracious subtlety, okay? And he does it in such a way that it's going to work in terms of the way people are and how they think and believe. So, why he has to do this, we will get to. But now we're just stating the fact. God always works with what there is. So everything in life is a fairly evolutionary process. It has to go from one stage to the next stage, and you can't rush and you cannot avoid the stages. We have to have stages of development, as we have in biology, so we have in theology. Okay? So, if the custom was to set up a temple and worship idols and offer sacrifices, then that's what we have to do. Line 18. So, God is not going to abolish these things in one fell swoop. Because people are used to what they are used to, and you cannot change them overnight. There has to be development, gradual development. You like evolution. So Rambam says, think about it. Say a prophet was to come along in our time, to us today, and he will say, okay, we all have to serve God. And he'll say, actually, God doesn't want you to daven, doesn't want you to fast. He doesn't want you to cry out in times of distress. But he wants you, Aval tiyeh avodatchem, line 21, the last word, machshava mibilti maaseh. Thinking, what goes on in your head, don't do a thing. Don't recite Psalms, don't say Tehillim, don't cry out, don't fast,
Don't pray, yeah.
none of that. It's all inside your own head, my friend. How would that go down? Shmuley, shall we introduce that in Eretz Chemda? Okay?
A lot of us do it already.
I would say that a lot of us just talk. It's
Nah, that's what I mean.
certainly not. There is a famous saying I saw in a shul in New York. Asur litpalel b'shat hadibur. Okay? But in any case, of course, I am exaggerating, but it really would not go down well anywhere in the Orthodox world. Okay, and this is Rabbi Rambam. Okay, so he says, of course, that is not going to work. In fact, that he can even mention it is perhaps a little eyebrow raising. So he says. ומפני זה השאיר השם מיני עבודות ההם והעתיקה מאותם לנבראים ולעניינים דמיוניים שאין אמיתות להם לשמו יתברך וציוונו לעשותו יתברך. So God says, look, I am going to give you the option to offer sacrifices, to go to a temple, to have priests, but it's going to be done my way, okay? The Havdil Elef Havdalot, the Sinatra way, okay? My way. Therefore, God says, will you build me a mikdash? And I want you to build me an altar. And I want you to sacrifice sacrifices. And I want you to bow down and I want you to offer incense. And you will not do any of this to false gods, to pieces of folly, but is only to me. And I will cut off anybody who sacrifices to another god. Line 26, beginning 27. And the Kohanim are devoted to the Beit HaMikdash, the Chihanu li, but they will be my Kohanim, says God. And then we have to give them Trumot and Masrot and all sorts of tithes and measures in order that they are compensated for spending their lives in the tabernacle. Now, line 28, third line from the end. So this wily or subtle, gracious subtlety, התקיימה הפינה הגדולה האמיתית באומתנו, והוא מציאות השם אחדותו. What's the purpose of this? It's an evolutionary step, developmental step. We get you away from coarse, crass idolatry. We get you to serve a God who is unique in being a one God, okay, and all of the things we've said about God. But the method we use to get you away from idolatry is to take the idolatrous practices, confine them, make them unique to God, get you away from the belief in many gods, and then you'll start to climb a path to perfection. It would be impossible to come and say, okay, stop worshipping God in the way that the gods are worshipped. Bini line 31. You will immediately react to this negatively. Very difficult for you to accept. And so you'll say to me, we have so many mitzvot in the Torah about the mikdash, the korbanot, when you offer them, how you offer them. You shall not leave bits of the pieces of the sacrifices till later. These shall be eaten in the temple courtyard. These shall be eaten outside. You shall not be impure when you come to eat the sacrifices. And that's all just to get us on the beginning of a path. It's not what God really wants. It's a huge amount of learning for very little profit. Why didn't God simply tell us in the first place, look, I want you, this day shall we say, to daven, and I want you to fast, and that's all. I don't need any sacrifices at all. No shrine, no Bet HaMikdash, nothing. Okay? And you think God couldn't make us psychologically prepared to do that? Of course he could. All right, so why didn't he do it? Why go through the whole rigmarole of hundreds of years of things that he really doesn't want in the end? Shema Teshuvati, line 35, fourth word. Listen to my answer. So Rambam wants us to listen carefully now. It will remove from you this sickness. The sickness of the soul, of course. You've got a bad notion, bad idea. And I've caused you to think. Now I'm going to make the thought palatable. Let me give you another example of this developmental evolutionary process. Okay, V'hu omro. We're going to read soon in Bashalach, when God took the Israelites out of Egypt, he didn't take them the closer route, which is Philistia. Let's go from Egypt, go to Gaza, advance from Gaza, and a very short while will be in Eretz Israel. God instead took them down to the Reed Sea and then crossed the Reed Sea, and they wandered around in the wilderness. Much shorter way to get to Egypt. It's only a very short flight on Egypt Air. You're up and you're down. Why did God do that? Because he said, Bnei Israel are slaves. They've just been taken out of slavery. Are they really going to be able to fight the tribes that they're going to find in their land? Are they going to provide a defense force? Are they going to know how to grapple with the enemy? They've been dehumanized, humiliated, subordinated, no backbone. They do what they're told. They're a servile mass. Are they going to be able to achieve what I want them to achieve, to come and conquer the land? Okay. Ken Siva, second word on line 39. בזאת המצווה שזכרנו מפני יראת מה שאין יכולת הנפש לקבלו לפי הטבע עד שיגיע הכוונה הראשונה. In the same way, God was constrained to give us sacrifices and temples and things because he couldn't get us to serve him properly without a process of acculturation, getting used to living in a different way. והיא השגתו יתעלה והנחת עבודה זרה. כי כמו שאין בטבע האדם שיגדל על מלאכת העבודות בחמר ובלבנים. Somebody who spent their whole life working with mortar and bricks as a slave, ואחר כך ירחץ ידיו לשעתו מלוכלכים, can he then suddenly stand up, wash his hands, take off the dirt, and fight with Yilidei Ha'anak? And of course, there's a pasuk from Parashat Balotcha. What did the Meraglim say? V'gam Yilidei Ha'anak, ra'inu sham. In other words, we have to fight with giants. You can't do that for a slave. Or slave mentality. כי אין בטבעו שיגדל על מינים רבים מן עבודות ומעשים מורגלים שכבר נטו עליהם הנפשות עד ששבו, line 1, כמושכל ראשון, ינחם כולם פתאום. So God couldn't take us out of the idolatry, the primitive idolatry, and get us to serve him in an abstract way in one go. We had to have a long process of acculturation. Now, and he says, they had to toughen up, they had to learn to survive, they had to learn to fight, they had to become a different generation. When you don't wash and you don't have a luxurious life, when you're in the army, you become tough and become capable of mighty acts. The hefkam Yolidu rach levav. And if you don't have that experience, you will be cowardly and afraid. ונולדו גם כן אנשים שלא הרגיlu בשפלות ובעבדות. You also need a generation that wasn't used to being enslaved. וכל זה היה במצוות אלוהיות על ידי משה רבנו, על פי השם יכלו, על פי השם יישאו, את שמרו על פי השם ביד משה. By the way, I want to go down to the source I have here somewhere, Ibn Ezra. Avraham Ibn Ezra was also a Spaniard, of course. He lived a while before Rambam. All right, I mean 1089 to 1164. Rambam was born in.
Spain, but dans quelle ville c'était?
How about
35.
How about 1135? So how many years between the death of Ibn Ezra?
When did you say it was?
65, 35, 39.
1089.
89.
39.
46 years.
Rambam was born in
1130.
1136.
1135, 1136. Ibn Ezra died in 1164.
That's not what you said.
So 29 years.
Okay.
Okay. So, I mean, Rambam could have read Ibn Ezra. All right. Even though by the time that Rambam could have read Ibn Ezra had left Spain. He was wandering around, which he did at the rest of his life. But Ibn Ezra says something very similar. Perhaps the Rambam either read or they had a common source. Let's read Ibn Ezra, line 16. התייצבו ראו את ישועת השם כי אתם לא תעשו מלחמה. רק תראו את ישועת השם אשר יעשה לכם היום. When the Israelites were at the sea, okay, they'd been taken to the sea, the Yam Suf, and they were scared. They saw Egyptians coming, and the message is, "Atem tacharishu, keep quiet. It'll be all right. Just stand back." The Ezra says, "Yesh letmor. Ech yarei machane gadol shel 600,000 ish. 600,000 men were terrified of their pursuers. Now, how many pursuers could there have been? Even if Pharaoh's army was huge at that time, it didn't come up to 600,000 men, and nevertheless they were terrified out of their wits. And if they had to fight for their survival and the families, they would have fought. The Egyptians had ruled over the Israelites. It had a lowly soul. They didn't have the capacity to fight, certainly their erstwhile masters. And they were not in any shape. They had no training. Amalek came with a small group, and had it not been for Moshe's tefillah, who knows, they would have beaten Israel. Hashem levado shu oseh gdolot. So it was God's wisdom, again using, if you like, this gracious subtlety, that the whole generation died out, so that the generation that came into the land of Canaan would be a tough fighting force that will be able to overcome the tribes in the land. כי אין בהם כוח להילחם בכנענים, עד שקם דור אחר דור, דור אחר דור המדבר, שלא ראו גלות והייתה להם נפש גבוה. Ibn Ezra contrasts nefesh shvala with nefesh gvoha. And God can't rush. He doesn't intervene with human nature. He doesn't change human nature. God works with human nature. That's the great chidush of the Rambam. You have to understand that God works with nature, and he will give us instructions and mitzvot that allow us to develop in the course of time. He will not insist that we go against our nature, nor will he change our nature. And he says the same thing, B'divrei Moshe. Why did Moshe, the Redeemer, have to come out of the story he came out of? Because an Israelite could never have stood up to Pharaoh. But who could stand up to Pharaoh? A prince of Egypt. Moshe, knew what it was to be an aristocrat, a prince, and therefore he had it within him to be the leader of the revolt. So, whether Rambam got this from Ibn Ezra, I do not know. I would not say, but it's something to think about. Line 4. Ken ba ze chelik min Torah. So, that whole section of the Torah that deals with Korbanot and with the Mikdash and with the Mishkan and all the Kohanim, b'tachbula Elohit. It is a talatuf, okay? It's gracious subtlety.
Tachabula, it's maybe the 10th time that we meet this word, and
Sure.
it's so
Yeah.
negative. It's a trick. It's a little negative.
Well, as I said, here Ibn Tibon is trying to find words for an Arabic phrase that he can't really find words for, because the Torah, our Torah, doesn't have much psychology in it. Okay, Jean? We don't find Adler in the Torah, nor do we find Freud. All right? So therefore, he's got to find a word. And he's having a tough time, okay? Tachbula, orma are not very nice words, but what it means is that you've got to do something clever in order to get from point A to point B. You've got to allow them to do what they used to, until they themselves, by a lengthy process, get to where they need to be, which is God's original intention. This is, as it were, God fighting with one arm tied behind his back, okay? And this is the way he wants it. And now you'll say, well, actually, why doesn't God do away with all this silly stuff? Let him make us into people who understand immediately that the way to serve him is with davening, tehillim, and fast, or perhaps just by thinking and feeling. Perhaps it's just necessary for what goes on in your head, a completely abstract form of avodah. That means, says the Rambam, you'll have to ask a second question, the light of my illustration. Why didn't God take them via the land of the Plishtim, Philistia, or Palestine straight away, and allow and give them this, give them spinach, so like Popeye, they could fight back, okay, that they would be power and strength, like magic, okay? Why did he take them around the wilderness for 40 years? And also, says the Rambam, why do we have mitzvot at all? Or why do we have reward and punishment, okay? God should just have said, I'm going to make you capable of doing everything that's good, and I'm going to deprive you of the desire to do that which is bad, and then it'll be a nice, perfect world. The answer to all of these questions, line 14, all these questions, the three questions I've asked and everything else, Tshuva achat kolelet is one general reply. Vehi, שהאותות כולם אף על פי שהם שינוי טבע, איש אחד מאישי הנמצאות, אך טבע בני אדם לא ישנהו. Now sometimes Rambam says God will change something for a person. There'll be a miracle done for someone. Okay, a woman who has nothing will suddenly find houses filled with pots of oil, as we saw in relation to Eliyahu. But he will not change the nature of humankind. Al tzad hamofet, by doing something extraordinary. Now, it's interesting that when God is talking to Moshe, just a second, he says this pasuk, and he says, Mi yitem, would that their hearts would be liyirauti v'lishmor et kol mitzvotai kol hayamim. When he talks about the revelation on Mount Sinai, the loud voice and all that, we know what the loud voice is according to the Rambam. But why is God saying, Mi yitem? Would that, okay? I would love it if it would possibly happen, which means that it might not, that the people will not always be obedient to God. And we know that that is exactly what happened, okay? That after the great revelation of Mount Sinai, 40 days later, say, they were worshipping a golden calf. So why is God, as it were, kavul, chained, and he can't do this? The answer is because this is the way that God wants the world to be. He wants humankind to be. In other words, there's reward, there is punishment, because we are, as it were, in an educational process, just like a child. We don't want a different child. The beauty of our children is that they are who they are. Our job is to try and help them become the people that they're capable of becoming. And that's exactly the way we have to look, says Rambam, about the way God directs the world. Rambam has dealt with that various places, the concept of free will, and the fact that God does not want us to be zombies or automata. We are creatures of free will who choose in the end to do the right thing. But sometimes we will not choose to do that, and we will fail. And God is sad. And he says, I would have loved it had you done the right thing, but I cannot stop you. And I will not stop you doing the wrong thing, because that is a different God and a different world. And therefore, he says, I don't believe that God could not do that. He could change the nature of every single human being in the world. But God does not want to do that, and will never want to do that, according to the basis of our Torah. If that was the case, there'd be no nuvoah. Of course, Rambam is very important, no prophecy. There would be no Torah, no point in any of this, because we would be automata. So this is the great challenge. And that's how the Rambam justifies the fact that he is explaining many of the mitzvot of the Torah as help, the early steps, the baby steps, if you like, to getting us to an end point, which from a Greek point of view is actually not bad, because teleology is what it's all about, getting to the highest point. Doesn't matter, as it were, what happens in the middle. But even people who are not, say, the winners of the marathon race at marathon, but they come second, third, or fourth, are also runners. They're not the best runner, but at least they are on the path. So therefore, the Rambam says we all play our part in this unique process, educational process given to the Jewish people. They alone have a shortcut. The shortcut is called mitzvot. They were weaned as a whole nation away from idolatry in a way that they as human beings could handle. It wasn't too extreme, it wasn't too drastic, and they're all going on the path. Some of them get there very quickly. Moshe Rabbeinu, B'chol Beiti Ne'emanhu, and as we've said before, Ata Amod Ta'amod Imadi. You stay here on the mountain. You look as if you're a human being, but actually you're an amazing human being, and what goes on inside, nobody around you knows. But for most of us, we are on the path, going along and doing our best in our best moments to try and improve. So Rambam actually justifies what you might look around today and see, that many of the mitzvot are based upon practices of the time, and we are in a process of getting rid of the worst aspects of idolatry, which, as we know, is much more than worshipping an idol, but is thinking about a God in such a way that is disgraceful. According to the Rambam's view, that is primitive, and we are all trying to get there. And the mitzvot help us.
Do we ever get there?
I have a question. Do we ever get there? The only thing I can say in the name of the Rambam is that Moshe Rabbeinu definitely did. Okay? Now, the Chazon Ish, which I read quite a few shiurim ago, he thought that the great poskim, okay, really high-class, tremendous poskim, perhaps got there to a certain extent, not like Moshe Rabbeinu, but then he was not a philosopher. So I think the field is open. Whether Rambam thought that he had gotten there, I remember we raised that question too, to get to be a prophet. And the prophet is what we are talking about, okay? Moshe was the greatest of all the prophets, but everything is in a grade, everything is graded, okay? Vashuv el kavanati. So now let's go back to my intention, which is, and here I'm going to go fairly fast, that korbanot, sacrifices, they are God's secondary intention for the people of Israel, and his major intention is that there should be prayer. Okay, prayer, right? But in order to get to the prayer, you have to go through the sacrifices, and so you will get a lot of laws about the sacrifices. The major point of those laws is to wean you away from idolatry, as it was widely practiced in those days. Everybody could make an idol in his or her garden, a bit like Japan or China. You know, you can have a house god or two or three in your home. None of this, of course, would happen in Israel. And if we read the prophets, we learn that on every hill and under every Asherah tree, somebody could erect an idol. This, of course, became taboo. So this is God weaning us away from idolatry. And a lot of emphasis is put on the limits. And now Rambam says something very interesting. Let's go to line 29, or 28 actually, at the end. Actually, all of the laws of sacrifices and the temple are to get you away from serving God in that way. It's difficult to go to the Bet HaMikdash, difficult to get all of those sacrifices. You have to have them at the right time. You can only have them slaughtered in a certain hour. You have to have them eaten in a certain place. It's a real pain, okay? Rather than the idolater who has his God in his garden, offers sacrifices when he wants to, and asks God, the gods, to send him rain and good crops and keep the locusts away when he wants. This is a very intimidating service of God. So it would be very difficult. So you wouldn't be that keen on it. And that is the idea. Okay, you're not so keen on it. Now, God didn't say do away with it. He says, I'm going to make it, didn't say, but the effect of the laws of the Bet HaMikdash and Korbanot is to make them fairly inaccessible. Tumah, no such thing as Tumah, but Tumah is there to keep you away from the Bet HaMikdash. Interesting idea. So that you can't go when you're in childbirth or when you've had this or that or come into contact with the corpse, which probably came in quite often. All of this makes it very difficult. Now he says, line 29, he would, but you can pray and supplicate to God anywhere. And whoever wants to. There's, you don't have to be a Kohen Gadol to cry to God. Tzitzis, mezuzah, tefillin, you can do them anywhere. Okay, there are laws about when you have to put up a mezuzah in Chutz La'aretz, and you might want to cover it up these days because of danger, which, by the way, was done in the past. Okay, but these are mitzvot that anybody can do anywhere. And the truth is we have Jews everywhere. וזולתם מן העבודות הדומות להם, ובעבור זה העניין אשר גיליתי לך. And so you can see that God's plan was to get us away from sacrifices, away from a temple, to doing mitzvot of a personal nature, and eventually, perhaps to something entirely abstract. Who knows? And now he goes on to cite the protests of the prophets against people who think that offering sacrifices in the temple is true service of God, especially when the people who are offering the sacrifices are stealing, robbing, committing adultery, doing all the terrible sins, okay? Now, he cites the book of Shmuel, line 33. God wants you to listen to him, doesn't want you to offer him sacrifices, really. Line 34, beginning Yomar Hashem. Remember the first chapter of Yeshayahu. Why do I want all of those sacrifices when your hands are full of blood?
Because of
When the widow and the orphan and the oppressed in society are trodden on by you. And Jeremiah says, now he has a nice pasuk. Ki lo dibarti et avotechem v'lo tzivitim. I never spoke to your ancestors, never commanded them. V'yom hotzi otam eretz Mitzrayim, on the day I took them out of the land of Egypt, al divrei olav hazava, about burnt offerings and sacrifices, which zevach would be shlamim here. Ki im et hadavar hazeh tziviti. This is what I commanded you when I took you out of Egypt. Shimu b'koli, listen to my voice. Va'iti lachem lelohim, I'll be for you a God. V'atem tiyu li la'am. Uchvar huksha ze amar b'nei kol ma sheraiti. And this pasuk is a source of great difficulty. Va'omar ech yomar Yirmiyahu al ha'eloah lo tzivanu b'divrei olav hazavak rov ha'mitzvot ba'u b'zeh. First of all, these are most of the commandments that we got in the Torah. Omnam kavanat ha'mamar hu ma she'viarti lecha v'zeh. שהוא אמר שהכוונה הראשונה אומנם היא שתשיגוני ולא תעבדו זולתי. True, I originally gave you all these commandments about sacrifices and Bet HaMikdash in order that you will stop worshipping idols. And then you'll be my people, I'll be your God. ציווי זה להקריב ולפנות אל הבית ולא היה אלא לשם השגת יסוד זה. But I want you to do that just to know how to serve God purely and without all of these sacrifices. Okay? ובעבורי העתקתי אלו עבודות, and to help you, I've given you a few of these idolatrous ways of doing things, but I've made it difficult, and therefore you'll not be unhappy to leave them alone and to replace them with tefillah, batei knesset, u'neshalma parim sfatenu. It was easy for the Jewish people, according to the Rambam, because the prophets had prepared the ground. I don't want sacrifices. In every other cult of the time, in the biblical world, sacrifices were the thing. Even the Greeks, and we'll make them post-biblical, okay? Sacrifices, all the time, sacrifices to the gods, even human sacrifices. Uvatem will be, and now you, says Yirmiyahu, Yeshayahu, Shmuel, to the evil people. You've spoiled the whole plan. This vit chazaktem kama shenaseh ba'avura v'hu she'atem sipaktem b'metziuti. What you have done is you have made the unimportant important, and you've made the important unimportant. You've denied me. Ki chashu b'Hashem amru lohu. You deny me because you do evil and wrong, and you disobey my other commandments. And there are many of them about making a just society. And on the side, you're worshipping idols. But you insist on keeping on coming to the temple. Okay? And that pasuk, by the way, is a very powerful pasuk. I've put in 3 dots, so I'm going to read you pasuk from Yirmiyahu Zayin. Haganov, Ratsoach, V'noef, V'hanishbad Shaker, the murderer, the adulterer, the thief, the one who takes a vain oath, and the one who offers incense to Baal, V'haloch acharei Elohim acherim asher lo yeda'atem, ubatem v'amadetem lefanai b'bayit hazeh. I'm going to paraphrase. You come to shul every morning, okay, and every afternoon. Asher nikra shmi alav, it is my house called after me. V'amartem nitzalnu l'man asot et hatoevot ha'ele. We can continue leading our double lives, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, because we come to shul and we daven and we put money in the tzedakah box. We support the local yeshiva and the school and the kollel, but we are doing all sorts of terrible things. I think Shai Agnon says somewhere that in Butchelov, okay, there used to be a saying, the wisecracks, they would say, Aganav, Aratseach, Anoyef, Aligana, Ober Ashenegid. Because he's there, he's coughing up, davening, doing his stuff, so we forgive him all of these things. The prophets would have none of that. You cannot be forgiven, and nothing will help you on the day of judgment, certainly. Is that what I really want? I want people who are virtuous, ethical, and who understand what is to be a purely religious person, not somebody who has false ideas about God and thinks that muzuzot are charms and all the other things that the Rambam objected to. Now I have a further explanation of this pasuk for you to pick up and understand, because I think that pasuk, B'yom hotzi'i otam eretz Mitzrayim, the day I took you out of the land of Egypt, or the few days. What happened a few days after God took them out of the land of Egypt? What did they get at Marah? Remember, before the Torah was given, they stopped at a place called Marah, and what does it say? Sham sam lo chok umishpat v'sham nisahu. So let's read this. Line 5. Sham sam lo chok umishpat v'sham nisahu. Chok umishpat at Marah, when they had the bitter water and Moshe threw in a tree, it became sweet because they studied Torah and they had laws. Uba Kabbalah hamitit, the true Kabbalah, says Shabbat v'dinin b'Marah ifkud. They got Shabbat and they got civil laws. The perfection of the body and the perfection of the soul. Remember, tikkun haguf v'tikkun hanefesh. In other words, Shabbat is theological perfection. Dinim is ethical perfection. That's what God originally commanded you when he took you out of Egypt. And we know that Shabbat, for example, was given before the Ten Commandments. How do you know that Shabbat was given before the revelation on Mount Sinai? Answer.
Because we have it in Bereshis, Vayeh vayvok yom hashishi.
That's not a mitzvah to keep Shabbat, Shmuley. I want an incident. I want something that happens in the Torah, in Parashat.
The manna.
B'shalach. There's a mitzvah that involves Shabbat. It was given before they got to Har Sinai.
The manna?
Exactly, the man. What does it say about the man? It says that you will not collect any man on the Shabbat. Okay? What does it say? Vayomer Elohim, hu asher diber Hashem. Vayomer Elohim, Moshe said, hu asher diber Hashem. Shabbaton, Shabbat Kodesh la Hashem machar. Et asher tofu, efu, etc. So they had Shabbat. And that's why in the Aseret HaDibrot in Dvarim, it says, Ekashet Siva. God commanded Shabbat, and he commanded dinim mitzvot b'nei Noach. Okay, they were going to the court at Yitro before Matan Torah, right? And Yitro says to Moshe, you cannot judge the people all the time. These were inyanim ben adam lach chavero. The Rambam is very happy with this. He says, you see, that sacrifices were not the first intention of God. First thing he did when they came out beyond Hotzi otam etz Mitzrayim was to give them chok umishpat and yidiyot amitiyot. And that's why he says, Chok haramuz elav hu Shabbat, uhamishpat hu adinim hu hasrat ha'aver. V'zot hi hakavana harishona k'Moshe be'arnu. This is the real intention of God, that we should be metukan b'nefesh u'metukan b'guf, a system of right thinking about religion and a system of right ordering of society. רצוני לומר אמונות הדעות האמיתיות והוא חידוש העולם, מעשה בראשית and מעשה מרכבה. And he goes on to talk about that, and I think we can probably finish up here, okay? And just end, of course, he has another pasuk, this time from the book of Tehillim, okay? Very powerful one. Line 12. Shimami va'adabera Israel va'idaba. Listen, my people, and I will speak against you. Israel, and I will testify against you. Elohim Elohecha Anochi. I am the Lord your God. Lo zvarecha ochichacha. I'm not going to criticize you about not having offered up the right sacrifices. Volotecha lenegdi tamid. Okay? All right. Lo ekach mi beitcha par. I don't take from your homes a single bullock, and mi michlaotecha, and from your sheep pens, goats. They don't interest me. B'chol makom shenichpal ze ha'inyan, zot hi hakavana ba. And this is the point wherever psukim that mention these matters. Vavineu mo'od v'istakel bo. As the Rambam often does, he says, I want you to take this point, this issue to heart, very, very, very carefully. Okay. Now I'm just going to finish off with a Shem Tov. We've met him before. Shem Tov ben Yosef ibn Shem Tov, our commentator on. Okay, Jean.
So the idea, if I understood, is all this accumulation of prophet statements to prove that it was not the first
A highest goal,
but from
but in
side,
terms of time, it is the first.
yes, but
You cannot get to the highest goal without going through these accommodations. That's the point.
But,
so in time, it's the second goal. But in terms of what God wants from human beings to at their best, it is the first goal.
but from this accumulation of prophetic statements, and especially from the one you quoted, but not Rambam, Uneshalma Parim Sfatenu, it gives us the impression that at the end of the time, we will come back to the prayer and to the Sfatenu, and we will let the sacrifice.
Uneshalma Parim Sfatenu was said in the Talmud. Talmud was a long time ago.
No, it was written in the prophets.
There may be another phase. And the Rambam has hinted that, and of course he's only hinted. Remember, he did say machshava bilvad.
Yes, but here he forgets that the prayer gives something very mighty. It is the emotion. When you think in your head, there is no emotion. When you pray, you find some. Donc, I think that comment dit son idéal? Prayer is more mighty than thinking inside, I think.
You think? When you started to use the word emotion, the Rambam has just turned off. The Rambam is not happy.
Oh.
No, he doesn't want to hear emotion, okay?
Oh.
All right, so, but we are actually going to go back to that at the very end of the Shiurim, which will be in 2024, okay, in Yirtzeh Hashem. But, okay, I got a couple of things. So in the last couple of minutes, I just want to, I'm going to talk about Shem Tov. And I'm not going to read, but Shem Tov is interesting because he basically deals with the question of question you've asked. He talks about korbanot. He talks about the fact that a korban could be like a tefillah. He says that korbanot were offered by Cain and Hevel when presumably there was no avodah zarah, Noach too. So what he sort of suggests something along the following lines, that there is a process here, as the Rambam says, we are going to go from a korban to a tefillah, and we might go from a tefillah to a machshava. But he wants to say that the Rambam would not say give up tefillah and somot and tehillim and zakot, okay? Perhaps that's emotion, perhaps it's not. Because why? Because these practices are good for two things. Number one, you can't always be at the highest level of prophecy. Most of us are not. If we were to only serve God in our heads, we would possibly not serve God at all. So at least every day, tefillah, za'akah, and responding in the way we have learnt to do, is a way of giving us a safety net that we will not fall off the derech, even if we are far beyond prayer and fasts, which are only, of course, suggestive. They're not going to achieve anything, okay? But we can always go back to them and know we are coming close. The second thing he says, and I'm unpacking a lot here, is that there's something inherently valuable about a God-given compromise. In other words, if I was to come along and say the best way of curing you of your habit to bite nails is to do X, Y, and Z, okay? That might be fine, but there's a difference between that and God. If God says, I want you to overcome bad religious practice by doing X, Y, and Z, mezuzah, tefillin, tefillah, tzom, then that might be a good thing always, okay? In other words, we go back to the image of the prophet. Prophet is standing in shul, he's saying the words, he's crying out, he's fasting, but inside there's a huge amount going on in his mind, okay? And he's thinking about the tefillot, as the Rambam says, he's focused his mind, he knows how to concentrate very deeply, he has ideas about every single word. What does it mean when it says Shema Yisrael Hashem Eloheinu Hashem Echad, and every single word? But people who look at him say, he's just governing brilliantly, okay? Wonderful, okay? And this is the same thing that we talked about earlier. A Talmid Chacham, somebody on the way to be a Navi, is going to be the nicest person you can imagine. Polite, respectful. But he's not really focusing on you with his whole mind. His mind is serving God. Shiviti Hashem, lenegdi tamid. But he's skillful enough to give you the impression that he's focused on you. Okay? So remember, we've talked about this. I'm now going to close the screen share because we are out of time, as usual, but that was fine. That was planned. I can answer the question that Jean asked me if people want to stick around for another 7 minutes. Question was, Rambam, as we've learned, says that many passages in the Tanakh, especially where malachim or angels are involved, are all prophetic visions, a mareh or a chalom, okay? So they never really happened. You want to hear about that? And Jean was not happy with the fact that the Akedah would be such an episode that only happened in a prophetic vision. If everybody says no, we will just say that's it.
Oh, yes.
Jack, you have the cast of vote.
Yes.
Yes. Yes, okay. So less, yes. So I will try and make this brief. But Rambam said, as we learned, that every time we encounter a malach in a prophet or in somebody who's really very close to perfection, the malach is what is going on in their own heads, okay? So what we would say is as follows. Story of Akedah is Avraham grappling with an issue. What is the issue? Everywhere around me in the world, people are offering human sacrifices, especially their own children. Agamemnon and Iphigenia, I think, to get the wind, to blow the fleet to Troy, okay? That is ultimate sacrifice. That gets God on your side. I, Avraham, believe in a God who doesn't want human sacrifice. Rashi is very interesting. Was after these things, and God tested Avraham. Rashi says, citing a midrash, Avraham was a little bit upset because he says to himself, "Oh, the Satan comes. Satan comes to God and says, you know what? Avraham has just got a son. He is having a party. He's doing mitzvot. He's having a great feast. Where is that capacity for sacrifice that will manifest itself in giving up your child? He's not like the heathens. They're a lot better than he. Now, if this is what's going on in Avram's mind, so he's going to have a prophetic dream about that. Remember, what you dream about in the day, what really concerns you, eventually will come out, we think about in the day, come out in a dream. And when we have a prophetic dream and there are such things, okay, then they are the prophet grappling with an issue. Avram is grappling. So he sees this because his imaginative capacity kicks in, as we said, Koach HaDimyon, and then there's a picture. Picture is God is speaking to him and saying, sacrifice your son. And he's getting up in the morning, and he's going and taking his donkey, and he's taking his knife, and his sticks, and his fire, and he's going. There are 3 days. He gets to the mountaintop, and then he's ready to say, all of this is happening in his Jean, in his dream, in his Moreh Nevukhim. And he's up there. And this is what Avraham does or realizes. The malach is his own self saying to him, Al tishlach yadcha el hanah. I don't think that this is what I should be doing. And in fact, if you think about it, the Akedah, even without any Maimonidean interpretation, is a rejection of human sacrifice. God, the angel says, don't. And Yitzchak survives, right? So this is putting it, I think, perhaps in a convincing form, even for a scholar of the Pshat. Okay? So Avraham's own voice inside his head says, no, don't do it. I've given this 3 days. I've thought about all of the consequences. I've come to the moment, and my whole being says to me, Al tishlach yadcha el hanah, v'al ta'as lo me'uma. Do nothing. Okay? Take him down, offer up a ram, animal sacrifice. Okay? And the Elohim is a superior angel who says, Ata yadati ki yirei Elohim ata. I know that you will not be led astray by voices in your head or of what the rest of the world is thinking, the idolatrous practices. And it's fascinating, Jean, that this idea is actually found in the Meshiloach. Does that book mean anything to you?
The name, I don't remember.
Meshiloach is Reb Yosef Mordechai Leiner of Ishbitz,
Right.
a Talmud of the Kotzker, who, like the Kotzker, is a very profound thinker and a very unusual thinker. If you look at the Meshiloach on the Akedah story, you'll see something very similar going on here. And he says that any leader will always have a problem, a leader with a vision. You think you've heard the word of God, but is it really the word of God?
Mm-hmm.
Or is it your conditioning, what people want you to do, what you think people want you to do? Can you ever know? He cites the pasuk, Vanochi afar va'efer. Avram says, I don't know whether what I'm doing is right or wrong. Okay? Whether by interceding on behalf of Sodom, I will be perhaps offering chance of salvation, or destroying the world. But I have to make a decision. So Avraham's inner voice, the best of Avraham, comes up and says, Al tishlach yadcha el hana. So any of the episodes, I mean, the book of Eov clearly is a Moreh Nevukhim. Okay, this is a prophetic grappling with the problem of evil. It's clearly patently like that. The four characters are all presenting different philosophical positions about tzaddik v'ra'lo and rasha v'tovlo. So it's a prophetic parable. It's got ideas. It has wonderfully descriptive language. Okay, this all fits in with the sechel and the koach hadimyon that Rambam always talks about when he talks about prophecy, which is again a little bit about prophecy that we did actually learn here. Okay, so these ideas ought to be familiar. Yonah and the whale, Bilam and his talking donkey. Bilam is grappling with a problem. He doesn't know. Should he go? Should he not go? He's really tempted by the money and the reward that Balak is offering him, but he doesn't know. There's something that says, no, this is not the right thing. And so he gives himself the answer. The Malach is a very weak character in the Bilam story. Okay, he comes to make Bilam's life bad, but in the end, what does he do? He says, okay, go. So again, what we're left with is something that's not resolved, because this is Bilam, as it were, dreaming and prophesying to himself. The Malach is, as the Rambam says, or if you accept the Rambam, of course, which I'm just explaining, I'm not advocating, okay? Rambam says that whenever you have a Malach, it is the Navi, the person who's grappling with really serious ideas, trying to figure out a way of solving the problem at the end of the day, what he or she ought to be doing or not to be doing. And it's a complex thing. The line between the two, I mean, certainly the Ish who visits Avraham, the Ish who wrestles with Yaakov, as Rambam says, these are all Yaakov. It's very suggestive. The night before he meets Esav, he's grappling with himself, all of those feelings. Was I right to buy the Bechorah from him? Was I right to try and listen to my mother and get the bracha in an underhand way? I'm not sure. But at the end, Kisarita im Elohim ve'im anashim v'tuchal. He gets justification from an angel. He says, I know at the end of the day, now looking back, what I did was the right thing. And Esav is Esav, I am me. And this is how he will explain all of these things. Okay? Now, the problem, this got him into hot water. What happened in 1232? In relation to the Moreh Nevukhim. What happened to the Moreh Nevukhim in 1232 in Spain? Hello? The Cherem by the Rashba, Rabbi Yonah Girondi, David ibn Shaul. And what did the Dominicans do?
They
They burnt it. And much of the Cherem was based upon allegorizing the Torah. Because the question is, Jean, how far do you go? And remember, Christianity says that the whole of the Old Testament is one big allegory. Okay? One big allegory. You don't have to circumcise. Okay? Va'araltem et orlat levavchem. You can find a pasuk in the Nevi'im as well. And of course, it's all to do with oisai ha'ish, okay? Oto ha'ish. So then the line between Christianity and Judaism starts to become rather blurred. So one of the major problems that people had, the rabbis, with the Rambam and the Moreh Nevukhim, was the tendency to allegorize. Because where do you stop? So the Rambam, I think, and this is where I'm going to end, will make a distinction between halacha and agadah. The mitzvot of the Torah must be kept. And he wrote his Mishneh Torah, Perush LaMishnah, because the Rambam is a halachist. He says that everything that God commanded us, those 630 mitzvot, have value forever and ever. And it doesn't matter where you are. Moshe Rabbeinu also had to put on tefillin, okay? But when it comes to the Agadah, apparently he would give you a carte blanche, perhaps, or perhaps to do as much allegorizing as you think, because otherwise you're sticking to sort of Bible stories that are taught to small kids. Okay, now perhaps we want to believe in those Bible stories. Rambam would say, therefore, as I wrote an introduction to the guide for the perplexed, you can. If you're not unhappy with a simple belief, then that's fine. Go ahead, Gesundheit, and believe. But if you want something more, and this is what I'm offering you, I'm being a little careful about how far I'm going to go. But as we've said on more than one occasion, citing Yael, you have to connect the dots. You can go as far as you want. Okay? So that is my answer briefly. So I think I've spared myself the email. Okay, Jean? D'accord?
D'accord.
Okay, merci beaucoup.
Sauf
So
que je
we will
voudrais
meet.
quand même qu'on parle encore une fois à l'occasion du péché originel, parce que là, il y a quand même un problème.
Ok, c'est pas un problème pour Maïmonide et je peux expliquer, mais pas maintenant. Okay?
D'accord,
En autre occasion.
parfait.
Avec plaisir. Okay, so we are going to meet for the last time this session next Wednesday evening, and I hope to complete the introduction to the reasons for the commandments in the guide for the perplexed. And what we're going to do after that, when I come back in Yirtz Hashem, all being well, in the middle of March, I think we'll resume on the 13th of March, okay? Then we will be able to actually go through groups, 14 groups of Tariag Mitzvot, and have a look at some of the very interesting things that the Rambam has to say about the corpus of Halakha. And we will correspond and let's say at this stage, Besorot Tovot,
Yeah.
Yeshuot, V'nechamot, and have a Shabbat Shalom, and we'll see you. We will resume again, all being well, Wednesday evening, and that's it for this evening, folks.